Hello everybody, and welcome back to Authors and High Theory. I'm Mark with the Modern Existentialist, and I'll be your host today. So last time, we laid out Beauvoir's Archetypes of Man, a logical framework through which we can begin to explore and understand her high theory. And we examined the first 3 archetypes, which belong to the serious world. If you haven't seen that episode, I'd recommend you go back and watch that before coming back to join us for this one. Alright, so in episode 3 of the Existential Basics, we already completed a comprehensive analysis and deconstruction of nihilist absurdist theory. Knowing what we do, then, we should now be able to just slot both philosophies into their respective positions on our graph. As a quick review, both philosophies clearly believe the world to be absent of meaning, and so we should place them both along the bottom edge, within the absurd world. The nihilist is the individual who believes himself powerless, denying his own agency, his status within the world as a subject. He believes that everything is subjective, but also that no one is a subject, that human beings have no real agency, and are never really actors within the world. He believes that we are, instead, simply only objects which are acted upon by objectivity, by our biology and psychology, and by the physical world itself. And so, we should place him on the left side of our box, where, like the subman, he believes himself powerless and without agency. The absurdist, whom Beauvoir refers to in the Ethics of Ambiguity as the adventurer, is the individual who, instead, believes himself completely free, embracing and reveling in his agency. He, like the nihilist, believes that everything is subjective, that the world is absurd, but then chooses to believe himself to be entirely a subject. He denies his status as an object within the world, believing that there's no such thing as objectivity, and that the world is free and open for him to create and define. Thus, we should place him on the right side of the box, where, like the serious man, he believes himself better than all the rest, completely and utterly free. There are men in every age filled with this drive to conquer that which they know can never be overcome. They live true to Nietzsche's will to power, the desire to assert one's agency in order to shape and define the world. Or, in other words, true to a life-affirming philosophy. They seek to know that they've made some difference, that they've done something meaningful and have left some kind of mark upon the world. These are the ones whom Nietzsche names masters, who Beauvoir calls passionate men. Like the subman is similar to the child, the passionate man is an individual who is similar to the adventurer. Like the adventurer, he believes both that existence is absurd, that a metaphysically objective meaning is inherently absent from the world, and also that he himself is an agent, in control of and responsible for his own actions. Where he differs from the adventurer, though, is in that he finds himself also near to the serious world, not only similar to the adventurer, but also to the serious man. Though the passionate man knows and believes that existence is fundamentally absurd, deep down, he can't help but hold on to hope that he might still be able to discover meaning in existence, even though he knows that it's absent. This is what Beauvoir calls the passionate man's passion, the project that he chooses for himself, and which he hopes and imagines will lend his existence an inherent, transcendent meaning. He believes not that he's empirically responsible for his own definition, but instead that he should or he must define himself, that man needs to define himself, or else he will have failed. And so, the passionate man channels his energy completely into his projects, Without his passion, he feels hollow and empty, the weight of absurdity heavy on his shoulders. When he isn't working in pursuit of his passion, he feels as though he's wasting his potential, what little finite time he has, on something pointless and irrelevant. And here, Beauvoir names 3 types of passionate men, though they're not so much types as they are just examples. These are the artist, the lover, and the intellectual, respectively. He who pursues the act of creation, he who pursues the ideal of romance, and he who pursues the acquisition of knowledge, all of them hoping that their respective passion could someday fill that hollow void which their departure from the serious world has left within their hearts. A passionate man's passion doesn't have to be anything specific, not just art or love or the ultimate truth. Instead, it can be literally anything, so long as it's the thing which he chooses to pursue with passion. And so, the passionate man wastes himself away, pursuing his passion and his projects at the expense of any and everything else, hoping that he might someday attain or achieve that meaning, to establish himself and make himself real within the realm of social objectivity. These are the masters, those who seek eternity, to become immortal in the hearts and minds of those who see and witness them, and who hope and pray that that might just mean that their legacy could live forever. In reality, however, we can observe that the passionate man is also empirically wrong. We can see, after all, that it isn't the case that man has a need to be defined through his actions, that he isn't compelled by his biology or psychology to define himself within the world. Instead, it's the case that man is already always defined by his actions. To be defined by one's actions, or inaction, in the case of the child, the subman, and the nihilist, isn't something which we should or must do, not something that we're inherently duty-bound to achieve. To be defined by one's actions is simply to say that the choices that we make and the actions that we take are the way in which we will have become defined. That definition, the way in which we choose to exercise our agency, isn't the ends which we hope to achieve. Rather, it's instead the means and the method by which we achieve. We don't have to exercise our agency. We don't have to choose. But, just simply in the act of living, it will already be the case that we are already in the process of exercising our agency. That we are already choosing either to choose or not to choose. To live is itself already the fundamental exercise of agency. To choose a passion isn't something that we must do. Instead, it's just something that we will do. The passionate man is the one who stands just upon the precipice of true freedom, so close, yet still so very far away. The crowning jewel of Beauvoir's Archetypes of Man is this: the defeat of the passionate man's philosophy, and, thereafter, her description of the final step which man must take in his move toward true freedom, toward becoming the Übermensch. A morality is a subjective value judgment, a personal characterization of what one believes to be truth. A morality, in other words, isn't a system of innate metaphysical value, or an ethics which claims absolute, incontrovertible, objective truth. Instead, it's just that thing that we've been talking about all along, what we've been referring to this entire time. A morality is just a personal philosophy. When Nietzsche speaks of twin moralities, of the master and the slave, his intention is to use these archetypes to express what he conceives of as a socio-philosophical stratification, which is evident within our world. Through every age and era of human history, Nietzsche's master has been a representation of the haves, of the nobleman, or the patron class, or the bourgeois man. The master is the one who possesses privilege, wealth, and power, the one who owns the means to assert his agency over his own life, and thus rules over those who do not. Think of this master, and what do you see? A rich merchant, or a powerful lord, or even the fat cat capitalist of the modern day? His needs are satisfied, his stomach filled. He lives a comfortable and luxurious existence, the mundanities of a roof over his head and the clothes on his back completely out of his mind. His needs are met, and so his attention and his concern become directed somewhere else, not at his needs, but instead at his wants. The master is the passionate man, he who lives in pursuit of the projects and passions of his life, free to exercise his agency and to shape and build the world around him in whatever way he sees fit. The master is the one who lives a good life because he has it good. The slave, on the other hand, is the one who lacks all of these things. He is poor and starving, his attention and concern directed at the roof over his head, at how he'll afford to eat this month, and whether or not he'll make rent. Through every age and era of human history, Nietzsche's slave has represented the have-nots, serfs and peasants, or the working poor, the proletariat of the world. Thus, the slave is the one who is lacking of privilege, wealth, and power, the one whose freedom is most constrained by facticity, and who lacks the means to assert his agency over his own life. The slave is the one who lives a bad life, because he has it bad. This system of opposing situations, this dichotomy which Nietzsche demonstrates between the philosophies of the haves and have-nots, is strictly not an ethics, not a statement about the way in which the world should be. Instead, it's obvious and self-evident, an empirical observation of the fact of how the world actually is. Master and slave aren't inherent properties. They aren't defined by a metaphysical essence contained within some kind of soul. Instead, they are descriptive terms assigned in the realms of both individual subjectivity and social objectivity. Through the exercise of one's agency, and how one chooses to wield one's subjectivity in one's interaction with facticity. In the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche lays out a set of specific archetypical moralities, a pair of twin dichotomies, the logic of which stand directly opposed, one against the other. In other words, two fundamentally opposed systems of belief, two moral theories which can never coexist because they contradict one another. These are what he calls good and bad, and good and evil. The master and the slave live the reality of a world of good and bad. In this world of good and bad, in this empirically observable setting, the slave himself worships masterhood, and just as well. After all, the slave is the one who has it bad. He's starving and poor, and his daily concerns are all to do with his continued survival. He looks up and sees the master, and sees that the master has it good, that he has all his needs satisfied and is in control of his own agency. And, regardless of whether a given slave loves or hates that master, he'll still feel a feeling of admiration or envy, the feeling that he wants to have it good too. In a system of good and bad, the bad wants to become good. The slave wishes that he could become the master, that he could become someone who's in control, someone who's free to live a good life, and who's free to determine his own fate. This is only natural, and this kind of upward mobility is fully and entirely plausible. After all, master and slave aren't inherent. There's no such thing as the essence of a master, or as the slave's soul. Nothing inherent which makes someone either one or the other. What sets them apart is only in their facticity, and the respective attitude which each one takes toward his own agency. Here, though, is where Nietzsche introduces a third and final character, the priest, an archetype which corresponds to the absurdist, or to Beauvoir's adventurer. The priest and the master, together, are the ones whom Nietzsche calls nobles. They're the same in that they both belong to the privileged class. However, they differ fundamentally in their respective moralities, in their personal philosophies. Where the master lives in pursuit of validation through his passion, chasing it as an end in itself, the priest lives in pursuit of validation in itself. He believes himself to be fully free, a perfect agent in a world of objects, yet still he finds himself fixed within a world of facticity. He claims himself to be only subject, strictly not an object, yet does not recognize that his very desire to be acknowledged for his greatness is, in itself, a desire to be seen as a kind of object in the eyes of other subjects. And so the priest, who seeks validation, looks upon the master and sees his greatness praised, that his excellence in his passions is rewarded both with the worship of the slave and the respect of other masters. And so, the priest grows jealous. He doesn't care for masterhood, for passions in and of themselves. He doesn't believe that they can give his existence meaning, because he believes the world to be fundamentally absurd, that meaning is inherently absent and can never be found in existence. Instead, the priest cares only for the praise and admiration, the worship which has come to the masters through the achievement of their feats of passion. The priest is the one who looks upon the master and the slave, and desires to become a master as well. He, however, doesn't worship masterhood, the pursuit of passions as ends in themselves. Instead, he respects and desires only the worship which the master receives. And so he hatches a cunning plan, a plan to tear down and defame the master in the hearts and minds of the slaves. In this way, the priest intends to replace the master with himself, stealing away the master's throne. Toward this end, the priest makes use of what Nietzsche calls ressentiment, the reversal of morality, and introduces what Sartre and Beauvoir call the spirit of seriousness into the world. In his lust and desire to become worshipped, the priest is the one who gives birth to dogma and to the serious world. The priest goes out and lies to the slave, whispering sweet nothings into his ear. He tells him that his situation isn't actually bad, that his situation isn't actually something that he should try to improve or escape. The priest tells the slave that his situation is normal, that it's the basic and right, and therefore good, mode of existence. He convinces the slave that his powerlessness is actually a cardinal virtue, that he is not poor, but instead humble, that he is not powerless, but instead innocent. He tells the slave that, because he's never done any wrong, he must therefore be right and good. In this reversal of sentiment, we can see that good and bad have become flipped on their heads. No longer is the master's privilege, his pursuit of his passions, good, but instead it's become evil. The priest tells the slave that because humility and innocence now represent absolute virtues, the master's wealth power, and agency have been, in reality, actually vices all along. The master is not strong. Instead, his essence is ruthless and cruel. The master is not wealthy. Instead, he has a greedy soul. The master is not free. Instead, he is simply just a slave to his own vices. The master is not free, because only the humble and the innocent are the ones who possess true freedom. This is the creation of dogma, the system of good and evil. By means of resentment, the priest manufactures dogma, flipping the world onto its head. He lies to the slaves, co-opting their agency and inciting them to tear the masters down. But then, afterwards, the priest alone ascends the throne, calling himself a leader and liberator, and basking in all the praise and glory of the creation of a new, serious world. Dogma is unnatural. Good and evil is artificial. That doesn't make dogma inherently bad. Instead, it makes it empirically bad. Because we can observe that, time and time again, it has never worked before. After all, if the function of a philosophy is to describe truth, to present an accurate representation of reality in order to best achieve one's goals, then all dogmatic systems necessarily fail as philosophies because they fail to generate an accurate representation of reality. Because the serious world is created by the priest in order to keep the slave in a position of impotent complacency, those who choose to live in that world, to become the subman and the serious man, become themselves fundamentally unadaptable. Because the dogmatists believe that they inhabit a world that is inherent, innate, and unchangeable, they fail to recognize, realize, and acknowledge that the world is a place which is constantly changing. That, if their truth fails to adapt, along with the evolving nature of what we believe that we know, then, very soon, their representation of truth, of reality, will no longer be any truth at all. Dogmatic systems all eventually collapse in on themselves because they're unable to adapt. And so it can be said that the master is the one who builds the human world, the world of social objectivity, through his pursuit of his projects and his passion. And it can also be said that the priest is the one who tears the world down, who leads that social objectivity into the rigor mortis of dogma through his pursuit of validation. The series continues in the next episode, where we'll be discussing the missing final piece of the box, that is, the truly free man, or the Übermensch. Stay tuned, and for now, this is Mark, signing off. Catch you guys on the next one.